Hello and welcome to episode number 279. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Welcome back. This is a premium episode. It's recorded and reserved for all those great fans of our show, like yourself, who have decided to support us financially with a paid subscription. Thanks. Today we have Wayne Turmel back on the program to take another look at his book, Meet Like You Mean It, A Leader's Guide to Painless and Productive Virtual Meetings. This time, we are going to the back of the book and look at the assessment templates that he includes. And if that sounds boring, then don't worry. This is, after all, Wayne Turmel that we're talking about here. Yes, we are using his template as the basis for the interview, but he manages to make our discussion not only fun and entertaining, but also highly educational. Oh yes, and of course, he is going to introduce you to the number one thing that will make all your virtual project meetings a success. Finally, don't forget, we have 2 copies of Wayne's book to give away, and since you are a registered premium subscriber, you can simply sit back and wait for the drawing. We'll randomly pick a winner from our subscriber list for one of the 2 books. If you want to double your chances of winning, of course, then please do go to facebook.com/pmpodcast and enter into the free drawing as well. And now, what could it be? What is the number one thing that will make your virtual project meetings a success? Well, enjoy the interview.
Project Management Podcasts Feature Interview.
Today with Wayne Turmel, president of GreatWebMeetings.com.
Hello, Wayne. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Cornelius. Good to be back. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, I promised towards the end of our first interview we'd have you back to talk a little bit more about your book, Meet Like You Mean It, A Leader's Guide to Painless and Productive Virtual Meetings, which you can find on Amazon, by the way. And what we're going to do is we are going towards the end of the book where you have tools and checklists and things like that. We're going to look at these. But before we start on reviewing those checklists, why did you write the book?
Why did I write the book? You know, it's funny. Most of my career was spent in management training and communication skills training. And so that's always been my passion. But as the workplace has changed over the last few years, not just project management, but everybody's work, the numbers of people who are working virtually are insanely high. And yet, as I've mentioned before, for 80 or 85% of people receive no training in the tools. These are our lifelines. You know, we're not allowed to travel. We physically can't span the distance. And so we're connected by these electronic tethers, and we've just been shoved out into the world and said, here, figure it out. And so, you know, the great management guru Peter Drucker said that the greatest management job of all time was building the pyramids, and we've just been trying to live up to that success ever since. Which is great, except at least the guy who built the pyramids was at the pyramids. You know, he wasn't trying to flog people by email. And so more and more I was talking to people who are just incredibly frustrated. You know, they understand the constraints that they're working under, and I wasn't able to find a decent one-stop guide to help people develop the skills to get really good at this.
All right. So let's turn our attention to the checklists, which are, as I said, at the end of your book. Why do we have a separate checklist for traditional meetings and one for virtual meetings? Because in the first interview, we kind of learned that all the technology that virtual meetings give us, it's really here more to ensure that we can take a regular live meeting and put it into a virtual environment. So why do we have 2 separate checklists?
Okay, I'm going to be really, really transparent.
Okay.
There is a really good learning reason, and there is a cynical reason.
Okay.
The really good learning reason is this. Meetings are one of those things that most of us have done for so long, and we literally do not stop and think about what we do. And so it's always good policy to take a moment and at least periodically take inventory and say, what are we doing? What works that we should continue doing? What isn't working that perhaps we should do something about? And the fact is that whether it's online meetings or traditional meetings, I'll bet you it's been a long time since we actually stopped and did an inventory of what's working and what's not. So from a purely practical reason, if you get no further than the assessments in the book and say, oh, you know what? We're not starting on time. We're getting off track. I need to do a better job of staying focused and making sure everybody's heard from. That's great. Go and sin no more. So some of it is just we need to analyze. And if I am having trouble with certain areas of this, how do I get better at it? The cynical reason is this, and it's exactly what you pointed out in the last interview, Cornelius, which is, if you ask these questions about our live face-to-face meetings, and then you ask them about the virtual meetings, with the exception of a couple of things, they're almost the same thing. They're the same problems. If you look at the top 5 reasons that people hate virtual meetings, number 1 is the technology is a hassle. We can't log on. There's firewall issues, whatever. That's number 1. But once you get past that, they're too long. They get off track. They're not engaging, and you don't hear from everybody. Well, those are 4 of the same 5 problems that you have with in-person meetings. And so a lot of this was a slightly, I like cynical is an ugly word, but it was a really obvious way of getting people to kind of play along until they realized, hey, wait a minute, we've been thinking about these meetings wrong.
Right. And this is maybe something that I didn't explain clearly enough at the beginning. We're talking about assessment checklists here. These are checklists that we use after the meeting is already over. You do have some agenda templates and things you can do before you start the meeting, but right now the meeting, the interview here that we're doing is focused on, an assessment after we hold our meeting. So do we review these assessments after each meeting that we hold, or do you have to be more selective?
Well, I think anytime you want to change behavior, right? It depends on the culture of your team. Is your team meetings, are they really functional? Are they really productive? And there's a couple of things you could do better and you just want to see if you're doing everything as well as you can? Or do you have a very real problem? If, as you're thinking about this, we're not hearing from people. People are not feeling like they're contributing. They feel like their time is being wasted. They're not showing up prepared. Then you need to change the culture, and you need to do that over time. So I would suggest with the post-meeting assessments is your next meeting, send out a post-meeting assessment just to see how it's going. Do their perceptions match your perceptions? And if there's little things you can adjust, then do it. If you really want to change the culture over time, you need to continually assess and evaluate. And it doesn't mean the whole team has to participate, but you should at least sit down after every meeting and say, okay, how did that go? Right? Did we do a better job of hearing from everybody? Did we manage our time better? Are we using the tools as well as we should? And it wouldn't hurt for at least the first little bit to ask those questions on a fairly regular basis. And then over time, you can start to, do spot checks. But if you really want to change your behavior, you got to change what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of
this is good input, Wayne, because one thing that personally didn't come across for me was who is supposed to be the person responsible filling in these checklists. But as you have now explained, this is not just something that you as the meeting leader should do, but this is something that you should be sending out and handing to your team and say, okay, everyone, tell me, what is your opinion of this question here, that question there?
I will tell you that it requires a fair amount of bravery to look at your team, especially if you know that the meetings aren't going the way you'd like them to, and ask them, why do you think these suck? That actually requires a lot of bravery on the part of a leader, but isn't that what leaders do?
Yeah. I can also tell you it really depends on the culture that you have on your project teams. those project managers out there who are using more agile project management approaches, they'll be used to this kind of stuff. Agile project teams, they meet once a month, sometimes even twice a month, and go through questions like this. What did work? What didn't work? How are we going to improve next time? So to them, this is nothing new. This is almost daily business. So, but for those out there who use waterfall approaches, we're doing a lessons learned at the end of our project. Yes, I agree. There will be resistance, and it does take guts to ask these questions. But the biggest thing is this. Even if we jump over our shadow here and we ask these tough questions, how do we then ensure that what we have learned from this assessment does not get forgotten?
It's funny. We're now out of the realm of project management specifically into human behavior in general. And how do human beings change their behavior? Well, first of all, we either go towards pain or we go, well, I guess there are some who go towards pain, bless their hearts, but we go towards pleasure. In other words, something makes us feel good, or we are avoiding pain. And with meetings, let's be honest, it's 90% avoiding pain. So we want to avoid the pain. What do we have to do? Well, as we all know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So we need to stop and say, what are we doing now that's not working? And if it's we're getting off track all the time, okay, how do you change that? Well, you have an agenda, you stick to it. The meeting leader is a little more forceful about keeping things on track. People are empowered to say, hey, we're getting off track, and we'll do that. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but then we'll do it again the next time. What changes behavior is consistency. Over time, you keep doing this. If you send out a good agenda, if the first time people show up and they go, this is the same lunacy, it always is, this is going to be a waste of time and I hate it, and it's not, they think you got lucky. So you have to replicate that. And then the second time they go, hey, wait a minute, this wasn't really a waste of time and this was actually useful. And then the third time they show up and they actually start to expect it to be that way. Culture evolves over time. Trust evolves over time, and it only happens through consistency. So if you want people to show up prepared, accountable, productive, then you have to tell them you expect that of them. You have to hold them accountable, and you have to do it every time you meet. And over time, you'll change the culture. But doing it once is not necessarily going to work miracles, and it's hard work.
What we want to do next is we want to take a closer look at the virtual meeting assessment checklist. It's too long to talk about every single factor that we need to review here during our interview. So what I've done is I've selected 4 of these factors for you, and I'd appreciate to hear your thoughts on each of these and why they need to be reviewed after the meeting. Like you said, possibly not after every single one, be selective. Okay, so item number 1 on the virtual meeting assessment checklist is the meeting starts on time.
Yeah, this is the single biggest complaint about virtual meetings. And if you're really honest, it's the same about all meetings. And I'm sure everybody's seen the YouTube video of the conference call and what that looks like if it were in the real world. And if you haven't, check it out because it's hysterical. But the meetings, even if people start to show up on time, it takes a few minutes to log in. There's some administrivia. There's, can you hear me? Is that okay? And then you finally get down to business. And that's very frustrating. So a couple of things. Number 1 is understand why people are late. Sometimes they're inconsiderate weasels. Mostly it's because their previous meeting, which butts up against it, ran late. And because it's virtual, we think, one meeting runs from 9 till 10 and the next one runs 10 to 11. Well, we know that doesn't happen. So if you schedule a meeting right up against somebody else's meeting, you're going to have some percentage of your folks not show up on time. It's not that they're rude. They just couldn't get out of the last meeting, and it takes time to log on. So schedule your meetings when you can. Here's a trick. This will boost the on-time numbers by at least 50%. Schedule the meeting for quarter after the hour instead of the top of the hour. And here's why I say this. If I have scheduled a meeting for 10 o'clock, your meeting is at 10 o'clock, I've probably got another one that is blocked out on my calendar from 9 till 10. But if I've got a meeting scheduled for 10:15, I probably don't have anything scheduled between 10 o'clock and 10:15. So if my other meeting runs a couple of minutes long, or I need to take a biology break, or I want to grab a cup of coffee before the next meeting, I can actually do it and still get there on time. So some of it is just, if you schedule meetings back to back, it's going to happen. Try to avoid it. If you can't avoid it, one thing that I really encourage people to do, and it's done very often as kind of an oh, by the way, but really enforce it. Encourage people to log on early. They don't have to be on the audio early, but encourage them to log on so when the meeting starts, they're good to go. I think that's really important, especially if people are unused to the technology. It takes a while to get logged on. Also, I like to leave the meeting open so that folks can join. I very often with my meetings have the same thing I have in an in-person meeting, which is a lot of, hey, how are you? How's the weather? Good to hear from you. If they're logging on early, you get a chance to do some of that and have some of that just casual social conversation so that when time comes, you can get down to business as soon as you've got enough people.
Next, we want to take a look at number 8 from your checklist. Factor number 8. The session leader appears in control of the technology. And here, talk to us maybe also why you chose the word appears. The session leader appears in control of the technology. Shouldn't the session leader be in control?
As in control of the technology as you can, but everybody who's been a leader has been in that position where it's duck on the water time. You look nice and serene up top, and underneath you're paddling like crazy. The trick is that when people log on to a meeting, the first couple of minutes, the leader sets the tone. So if you sound, hi, everybody, how you doing? Here we go. We're going to push this button. This is going to work. And you sound like you're in control and competent, you're going to give the perception, hopefully it's legitimate, that you are in fact competent and in control, and people relax and feel like they're in good hands. The trick with technology is that you need to develop muscle memory. You can't just sit down and, if you think about what's actually going on when you're leading a virtual meeting, you are checking the technology, making sure everybody's connected, making sure it works, trying to show your visuals, trying to talk, trying to listen, all at the same time. It's a really good reason to stress out. As you develop the muscle memory and you become competent in the tools, your brain actually allows you to lower your stress level because those things become unconscious. Think about what goes on in a meeting. You are counting heads, making eye contact with people, checking your visuals, making sure that you're focusing on what you're trying to say. We're doing a lot, but we're so used to that we've developed the muscle memory. We literally don't think about all the stuff that we're doing. Because in a virtual environment, we are in unfamiliar territory. Our brain, our amygdala, and our hypothalamus freak out, and they send out all kinds of stress signals, which make it really hard to focus and have your head in the game. If you have had the opportunity to practice with the tools to develop that muscle memory, and I'm going to say this, and nobody believes me, but it's true, it only takes about half a dozen times. If you fire up whatever your web meeting platform is, and you try those tools out a few times on your own, by the 6th time, you literally can do it on automatic pilot. But there's no way to get to that level of comfort without practicing and without getting coaching and without seeing it modeled and all of those things that help us adopt any technology.
Right. And of course, then the new version comes out and everything looks different.
You know, it's funny, though, about those tools. The analogy that I always use is renting a car. When you rent a car at the airport, there's always that moment of trauma and drama where it's different than your car. I remember at the Vancouver airport frustrating the poor lady at the ticket booth because I couldn't give her my contract because I couldn't find the window down button on a PT Cruiser, right? It was just, And we do that when we get in a new car. Where are the turn signals? How do I turn the wipers on? Where's the radio button? All that stuff. And after about 3 minutes, you go, oh, it's a car. I know there's a button here somewhere. What do they call it?
Right.
So once you get used to running virtual meetings or delivering webinars or presenting online, if you're used to one platform, it'll take you a couple of minutes. Maybe you want to take a practice session and learn the new platform, but they all do 90% of the same stuff. You just have to figure out, is it called an annotation tool or a whiteboard tool?
Okay, let's jump to number 10 on your checklist. Meeting factor number 10 to review. All participants are solicited for input. Why is it important?
Well, theoretically, if you're inviting people to the meeting, it's because they have something to contribute. I mean, it's a wacky notion. If they're coming to the meeting, they should have some valid reason for being there. And one of the reasons people tune out is because I'm not going to be heard from. Nobody cares about my opinion. So yeah, I'm on. I get the little check mark beside my name that I came, but I don't have to have my head in the game. If I know that I am going to be expected to participate and that my opinion matters, I'm liable to actually pay attention. Also, it sends the message that every member of the team is important. One of the great hazards of conference calls, because they're primarily auditory, is we know that even though we call for everybody to contribute and we call for questions, we hear from the same 3 or 4 people all the time. And let's be honest, they're not always the 3 or 4 people we most want to hear from. But the dynamic of a conference call is, if you are an extrovert and if you are good at kind of verbalizing your opinion and you don't mind being pushy, you'll get heard. Culturally, that creates all kinds of problems. But with virtual meetings, because you can solicit information by polling, you can solicit information in the chat, so you can get written input. You can have multiple ways to hear from people besides just having them speak up. And that sends the message that they are expected to contribute. And when people are expected to contribute, over time, they'll live up to or down to your expectations. I prefer to have them live up to them.
The final and fourth factor that we want to take a look at from your assessment checklist is number 14 on the checklist. And this has actually been a recurring theme that we've talked about a few times. The technology actually adds value to the process and isn't a distraction.
Yeah, it comes down to the title of the book, which is Meet Like You Mean It. If we're going to meet, why are we meeting? What needs to be accomplished? And what's the best way to get everybody's input? You know what? Sometimes a 5-minute conference call is all you need. Great. Then have the conference call. If the webcam, for example, is creating bandwidth problems or people are uncomfortable, then don't do it. Start with what is your first priority? What needs to happen in this meeting, and what are the tools that are going to allow us to do that? And then choose the appropriate technology. I'm not a big fan of virtual meetings for the sake of having virtual meetings. If a conference call will do the job, I'm perfectly happy with that. It's about getting the work done. But if you want to get input and you want to hear from multiple people in multiple ways, and there's a visual component that's going to add value, then you should plan to do that.
We've only looked at 4 factors that come from your assessment checklist. Is there one item on the checklist that stands out for you? Which one would you say is this one here? It's probably the most important one that we need to review.
Yeah, and I keep harping back to this, but it's impossible to overstate. Have the participants received the agenda in plenty of time to prepare? And an agenda has, as we've outlined it in the book, and there's a planning sheet around it, there are some very specific components to the agenda. There's the meeting logistics, right? What time is it? Here's the link to join. Here's the dial-in information, all that stuff. But in the agenda should be the purpose of the meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to answer any questions and identify any problems with the Johnson Project, right? the desired outcome. By the time this meeting is over, we need to settle on next steps for this project. In order to do this, we need you to read this information and be prepared to talk about it. Now, when people show up, they have no excuse for not being prepared. They know what's going to happen. They know they're expected to contribute. They know what we're referring to. Now, if they don't, now it's an accountability, it's a people management problem. But nobody should ever show up to a meeting going, what is this about again? Why are we here? If they're showing up saying, why are we here? You're already in the hole. It's almost impossible to dig out of that hole.
Since we have to harp on this particular item again and again and again, there's only one reason for it. We don't do it. Tell me, why don't we do it? Why don't we send out an agenda? Why don't we get it into our collective heads? It's the most important thing to do before a meeting. Get the agenda together, send it out. What's stopping us?
In the defense of mere mortals, which we all are, the fact of the matter is that it takes time. And as human beings, we're really, really good at finding the time to fix problems, but we're not really good at investing the time to cut them off in the first place. And the fact is, because we dread the meeting, we treat this stuff as an afterthought. We don't put all the work into it that we should, and we wind up being punished for that on the back end. Meetings stink. Well, yeah, they often do. You're right. What can we do about that? Well, how about making sure that they don't? And there are some things that we can do. It's funny. I always refer to this as the eat your broccoli part of it, because if I put a gun to your head, and I won't because that's an HR violation, but if I put a gun to your head and said, is it a good idea to send out an agenda? Everybody would say yes. Do you send out an agenda? About 75% of people say they do. Do you send out an agenda that actually tells people what is going to be covered and, oh, by the way, doesn't come 10 minutes before the meeting? The number drops precipitously. There are lots of things in life. We know the only way to lose weight is exercise and watch what you eat. That's it. There's no other way to do it. But we don't all watch our weight. It's not that we don't know that we should. It's that there's a lot of other things going on. And so one of the reasons that I've written the book in the style that I've written it, Cornelius, is, look, we know what the problem is. Here's what you can do about it. At the end of the day, you're either going to change your behavior or you're not. Reading the book is not going to help you have better meetings. Doing the stuff in the book will give you a fighting chance. And it's like that with almost everything we do.
Here's my last question for you. What is the first thing that you do after a virtual meeting ends that you recommend that our listeners start doing as well? And by the way, taking off my headphones, that's a given. So that doesn't count.
Yeah, and making sure your mic is off before you curse is also a really good plan. But we'll assume that's an assumption, that's already happened. There's a couple of things that you should do. The first thing is just take a deep breath. Look at the action items, and if there are things that need to be followed up on, follow up. If you promise to send out an attachment, if you promise to send them the notes. Now, the good news is that in a lot of these platforms, in Link, for example, you can actually create the notes and people can download them directly to their computer. You don't have to transcribe your notes into English and send them all out. So if you use the technology, you can make that task much less onerous. But if you don't follow up on your action items in a timely manner, the message to your team is it's okay not to follow up on your action items in a timely manner. So the first thing that I would suggest is if you have promised anything, that you do it. That's just flat out. The second thing is take a moment and just ask yourself, whether it's using the assessment sheet in the book or just taking a moment, what went well? What went well, what didn't? Right? Is there anything burning as a result of that? Did it sound like somebody got their feelings hurt? Did it sound like somebody was angry about something? What happened in that meeting? And that should set your priorities for what comes next. So follow up on your action items and then take a moment and really analyze what happened, what went well, what could go better. Because if you ignore that stuff, it's going to bite you. You know, if you say, well, so-and-so got their nose out of joint, sucks to be them, and you don't address it, over time, that's going to impact the dynamics of your team. And so it's better to invest the time right now, or at least as quickly as humanly possible, than to let things fester, because eventually you're going to have to deal with it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Wayne. To close, once again, the book is called Meet Like You Mean It, a leader's guide to painless and productive virtual meetings. You can find it on Amazon, either as a real book in paperback or as Kindle. It is 146 pages long, and the author is, of course, Wayne Turmel. And don't forget, most important thing when it comes to meetings, send out an agenda. Wayne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Cornelius. Always good to talk to you, man.
And that was Wayne Turmel with another fun, educational, and entertaining discussion on how to make a virtual project meeting successful. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a PMP or PGMP and you're looking for a simple and effective way to earn your PDUs, then try the PDU podcast. You'll get a new webinar and at least one new PDU every single month, completely on autopilot. Stop by at pducast.com. That's pducast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. I know it's a repetition from a previous podcast, but it fits so perfectly for today's topic, I just had to use it again. Here you go. You will only remember that you forgot to prepare that all-important project status meeting about 15 minutes before the meeting starts, when your calendar reminder pops up on the screen and tells you about it. Until next time.